We thank you, Reverend Ira Ackery. We thank the pastor of this marvelous church, Reverend Marshall Hatch, for having us here today, the Rainbow Push family. I'd like to thank my father, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, as I stand here in his rightful place, for keeping this fight alive so that we have a family, a community of freedom fighters that show up every Saturday, in season, out of season. We will stay on the battlefield for racial justice. I'd like to thank Reverend Jeanette Wilson and the Reverend Dr. Congressman Danny Davis. I really want to wrap the message up. It can't get any better than that, Reverend Davis. I love that man. But the message for the day on this, our Veterans Day, we have a lot to be thankful for our veterans. Let me read this quote for you, if you will. I had crossed the line. I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land, and my home, after all, was down in Maryland, because my father, my mother, my brothers, and my sisters and friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free. These are the words of Miss Harriet Tubman, written in her book on the life and times of Harriet Tubman. On this Veterans Day, let us remember that the African American family and community has fought in every American war. When I see these veterans, to think of the fights that they've had to endure. And what do they want? They wanted victory abroad and victory at home. If you follow me down this timeline briefly, this is the 400th year of Africans in the Americas. We were here at the founding of the nation for Jamestown in 1619, 400 years ago. Mrs. Harriet Tubman escaped, if you will, from slavery. A woman that was born free in the eyes of God, that was enslaved as an American in 1849. Now, you know she's a tough lady when she had a $40,000 bounty on her. You can spend 10 years in jail in Cook County and can't get $40,000 in restitution. This woman fought for freedom. And some people say, oh, that's not that remarkable. I would have done the same thing in slavery. No, you would not have. From 1619 to 1849, after 230 years, when your mother's father's father had all been enslaved, and by American law you could not read. By American law you were denied education. By American law you were to be maimed, crippled, and ignorant. But somehow God had put a seed inside of her that she knew she was born free. How did she find this quench, this thirst that was unsatisfying, that she wanted to escape for freedom? And when she decided to run, going off the kindness of strangers and giving a general proximity of a direction, a place she had never gone before. She didn't have a Rand McNally map. She didn't have a globe. She didn't have GPS. She didn't have a 4x4 car. She did not have an electric vehicle or a Tesla. She had to run in a long skirt. She did not have on Lululemon pants and a water bottle. She didn't have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch counting steps. She just wanted to move toward the direction of freedom. That's 1849. After 230 years, her two brothers went with her initially. And what did they do? They were afraid. They had to turn back. Because sometimes it's easier for us to go back in time for a place that we never should have been, a place we should not return, but it's so comfortable for us to go back into bad habits. We've got to break the bad habits and go forward. That's 1849. The Civil War really kicks off in 1859 with the raid of Mr. John Brown. Mr. John Brown, a freedom fighter. He said, if I had done for others what I have done for the African Americans, I would be here being honored, not to be put to my death. So I suffer my fate, and I will be glad to mingle my blood with the blood of my children. Mr. John Brown asked Mrs. Harriet Tubman to join him in Harper's Ferry. She recruited for him. She says, I don't believe in the violence. She says she simply wanted to free her people. Mr. John Brown called Harriet Tubman General Tubman on this Veterans Day. Why is this so important for us to remember? It wasn't that long ago, and it's not that far away. We're now living in the 150th anniversary year of the birth year of the Mahatma Gandhi, an apostle of freedom. This is the 90th birth year of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. This is the 50th year anniversary after Miss Shirley Chisholm ran to become the first Congresswoman African American in the United States House. It's not been that long ago. At the beginning of this week, we laid to rest an American hero, an American veteran, an American statesman, a man who signed more progressive legislation than any other American in history. The Honorable John Conyers. I don't know why his body was not lying in state under the rotunda in Washington, D.C. A man who signed the 64 Civil Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act. A man that had the idea that said we should have a national holiday for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who worked on it assiduously for 15 years when people were afraid to be called by the name of the Reverend Martin Luther King. When my father took us repeatedly, year after year, I didn't know why we were going to Washington, D.C., and there weren't but a handful of us to honor the Reverend Martin Luther King. But there was a vision, and I want to thank you for that, Dad. And I want to challenge some other parents. Get your children involved. Then a young man named Stephen Morris, you know him now as Stevie Wonder, he put the message to the music. He took John Conyers' idea and then wrote the song, Happy Birthday to Reverend Martin Luther King. That is what made Mr. Ronald Reagan sign the national holiday for the Martin Luther King. But we're not going to stop there. Then the market stayed open, but the federal government was closed. My father, the Reverend Jackson, said that's not enough. He went to Wall Street to talk with Chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, Dick Grosso. He went to talk with the largest banker in the world, Sanford Weill, and said, why is the market open on Reverend Martin Luther King's birthday? They weren't hostile. Mr. Dick Grosso says, we've never thought about it. He says, this is a membership-based organization. Let me poll our members, and I'll get back to you immediately, Reverend Jackson. The next day he said, it has been unanimously agreed that we will close the markets on behalf of the Reverend Martin Luther King. Thank you, Dad. There's a hot button issue that we have to address today. We've talked about the veterans and our beloved soldier, the first female to lead an armed infantry into war in the United States, Miss Harriet Tubman. The Combahee River down in South Carolina. Oh my God, the woman had courage. I don't want to get off track, but I want to use her as an example of the spirit that we have to rekindle. She made it out of slavery. She moved on uptown. She had a house. She took others to Canada. Her family was out, but she had an undying, unquestionable thirst for freedom for all. So she kept putting her life at risk, and she kept going back. That's a challenge we have today, to go back and get somebody and fight for freedom. Let us not be complacent and be an embarrassment to our ancestors. When we talk today about a hot-button issue, I want to thank the infantry of the 9th, 10th, 24th, and 28th Infantry of the Buffalo Soldiers, the men that have fought gallantly in the wars. When I thought of the Buffalo Soldiers, I had to think of the Buffalo Wild Wings. On this Veterans Day, those same soldiers fought, did not get their compensation, did not get their pensions. They had to fight for a victory abroad that they did not have here at home. Today, I saw on the morning news, there's a celebration of the wall coming down in Berlin. And that was a great thing 30 years ago, where our soldiers, African Americans, stood guard. Our soldiers broke up Nazi concentration camps. Our soldiers fought abroad and came back home, and Nazi POWs stayed in front of our own soldiers. That's wrong. The great Joe Louis got part of his burial expenses paid for by the German Nazi Max Schmeling because Coca-Cola had given Max Schmeling a Coca-Cola distributorship. Mrs. Harriet Tubman, she was trying to go to St. Amboy. She got kicked off the train. She had a military pass in 1865. She was working as a nurse, and the conductor says, "We don't honor niggas at half fare." She says, "But I'm in the military." They threw Mrs. Harriet Tubman off the train. Why am I saying this? We have to understand. So let us put Buffalo Wild Wings in perspective. We've been getting kicked off seats a long time, and we're not going to let it happen. When 18 people show up to have libations and recreation with their children, and there's veterans in the room, the same liberty and rights that we fight for in Germany to bring down the walls. My father, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, has fought to bring down the walls within corporate America so that we can have prosperity right here at home. There are over 759,000 franchises across the United States of America. Part of what we see in Buffalo Wild Wings is a lack of racial sensitivity and diversity and inclusion. You can cut us in or you can cut it out. Our people have a right to franchises. Our people have a right to respect. Our people have a right to be able to enjoy an American way of life. Let me tell you something about the franchise business. There are over 17,000 automotive dealerships in the United States of America. They sell over 17.2 million cars. There are only 269 African American automobile dealership owners in the United States of America out of 17,000 plus. How does that dollar trickle and cycle around? Well, when you want to have a bake sale, when you want your children to have matching uniforms, when you want your bus trip sponsored to go downtown, when we want to have our children to be able to go see the Harriet Tubman movie, and you need a business person in our neighborhood, and we don't want our children out on street corners begging, walking up on every car that's empty, trying to seduce our children. You've got to have businesses and economics to help drive the other part of our liberation. When you have over 1,700 television stations, and those general managers that don't go up front but stay behind the scene and have the editorial content, they are the ones that decide which women have Amber Alert and which children are going to be rescued. They're the ones that give us community information, or they simply ignore us, block us out, set us aside, and say that we aren't relevant. Why are we here on the West Side today? Because the Reverend Martin Luther King came to the West Side in his outpost in Chicago. Why are we here on the West Side today? Because Reverend Marshall Hatch and Ira Ackery and my friend, Brother Brandon Johnson, hold up the mantle and fight for justice right here on the west side. Why are we on the west side? Because we have unfinished business on the west side of Chicago. Buffalo Wild Wings is not alone. We're going to seek to meet with the CEO and ask him what is his plan for diversity and inclusion. How did they get to this point? We want to know, and we're going to report back to you. How many African American restaurateurs and franchisee owners do they have? Please reach out to us. We will be accepting applications to submit to him. We deserve franchises in our neighborhood. And there's a dark, dirty secret I want to share with you about franchising and what they do in retail. We need underwear. We need cars. We need cell phone repairs. But it's conspicuously under-retailed in our neighborhoods. Why is that? Because when they get into groupthink with a few corporate executives, and then they end up telling you what should be they try to say it in a very kind and gentle way. We don't do urban. Major franchises will tell you we don't do urban. What are they really saying? It's the same fork. It's the same lettuce. It's the same beef. It's the same cheese. But we don't do urban. Brothers and sisters, that's code word for we don't want to be in the black and brown community. If you sell waffles or chicken, you go where the customers are. Why would you say geographically and carve out an opportunity of a zone and say, we don't service that? That is racism and Jim Crow dressed up, and we are going to confront it. When you don't have the outlets to service your iPhone in the black community, and you have to go over on the west side past the imaginary line of Austin Avenue. When you drive Hyundai and Toyota and Mitsubishi and Cadillac and General Motors and Ford and Chrysler, and you got to go past the imaginary line to get past Austin Avenue to service your car. That's racism in economics, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm telling you today, let us not adjust to that in the spirit of Miss Harriet Tubman. Someone's got to be upset about this. And I want our children to join the fight. Why do we send our children to school? Why are they encouraging that? Why are they accumulating this debt? They're accumulating the debt in the hopes of being able to get a better job, to leverage that debt into an asset so they can do something more. But when the doors of opportunity are closed, when they can't own cellular franchises in their own community and they stay on the phone all day, something is wrong. When they have to leave their community because they cannot get their car serviced, something is wrong. When there's no hotels focusing in the African American community, something is wrong. It's been 400 years, and I'm not tired. Some people are tired and never fought. Some parents, and this is a word of caution to you, you're doing everything right. I see so many well-behaved and mannered and intelligent students, and they're getting their resumes together and they're seeking job opportunities. Keep that up. But in the spirit of Harriet Tubman, sometimes a fight chooses you. You didn't choose the fight. When it's time to fight, don't cower, don't back down. Stand up. Our children are being denied internships. Our children are designed opportunities to give them franchises where they can be business owners in their own community. I worked one time for a cellular company, opening up franchises. And I wanted to open one in Chinatown. And then they got back to me quickly after they looked at the map. And they said, Mr. Jackson, can you pick out another location? I said, what's the problem? I see that's an open spot. I'd like to have that territory. And they said, well, we want to have a Chinese person working that in Chinatown. I said, oh, interesting. Okay. Then I tried to open up something on 3745 West 26th Street here in Chicago in a Hispanic neighborhood. And then I tried to buy the building, and the lady says, speaking in Spanish to another coworker, no, we can't sell you the building. And I asked the person what happened. She says, if we don't let Spanish people buy this building, they won't have their own community. Okay. I'm coming down 22nd Street in my car and get stopped by 3 officers, Chicago style. And I asked them, why were you stopping me? Running your plates, your license, and everything, right over here on the west side. And I said, what happened? They said, well, you're going into a drug-infested neighborhood. I said, well, the city on the website says this is the 3rd most productive tax street in the city. I'm building out a wireless retail store. Then I stopped and said, why are you asking me why am I in a Mexican neighborhood? Why are you asking me why am I going to Chinatown? The whole world comes to the black community to make money every day. We need economic inclusion. The walls in Berlin have come down. They had $1 trillion economic integration plan to integrate their brothers on the other side of the wall in Germany so that they would raise their standard of living. When the wall came down, all the initial people that ran across there were given 50 marks so they could go to the store, so they could shop, so they could begin economic reunification socially and politically. What happened after slavery? Miss Harriet Tubman said she came to a land of freedom and there were no hands extended to her. The promise of 40 acres and a mule was snatched back by Andrew Jackson. And by the way, his picture was put in the Oval Office by Steve Bannon and serves as a role model to the President of the United States. A man who fought every piece of civil rights legislation. A man who saw no dignity and honor in Harriet Tubman. In closing, I want you to know from the Aesop fable, there was a dog and there was a wolf. Cousin dog and wolf. They were out in the woods. And as the dog saw the wolf, the dog says, Cousin Wolf, why don't you come home with me? I see your rib cages are showing. You look hungry and your coat isn't that pretty. I've got a great master that I serve, and he feeds me well, and his children play with me. Why don't you come back to the house? And the wolf, now being hungry and skinny, he started going towards nightfall back towards the house. The dog says, I got to get back before nightfall. And as they got up closer to the house, the cousin wolf looked at and spied a mark on the dog's collar. And the wolf said, what's that on your collar, dog? He says, well, sometimes the master, when he puts the chain on me, he puts it on a little too tight. And so it can give me a little rash and a little bruise. They're really good people, but sometimes the chain. And the wolf says, what is the chain all about? Well, I stay outside in a dog and I make sure people stay away at night. But other than that, he lets me go and I can roam when they're free for the day. So the wolf turned around and started going away. And the dog said, where you going? He says, I'd rather be lean and free than fat and in slavery.